Today, my name's Chad Dunn, and I'm the Vice President of Product Management and Product Marketing for VxRail and VxRail SDDC at Dell EMC. Our business unit focus is hyperconverged, centered around VMware. So as we look at VxRail, that's a VMware-centric product based on vSAN and some other VMware technology, as well as EMC, legacy EMC technology, as is VxRail. So when we talk about our solutions, the sort of center of gravity is to optimize around the VMware user experience. What I thought I would do today is not try to kill you with slides, but give you sort of an update on where VxRail is in terms of the products that we have in market today, how it's going from a business perspective, what's working well. I want to be transparent with what's not working well because we're launching a new product. We launched this product in February of last year. We also merged two very big companies, largest IT merger and go private ever. Did that all at the same time. We're a little tired. Things are going to go right, things are going to go wrong, and we've sort of lived through that. And I'm happy to share my experiences, at least from my perspective, on how that went. Okay. If you want to contact me after the fact, it's just chad.dunn@dell.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter. It's VxChad. Okay. Go ahead to the next. So just a refresher for those of you who haven't seen VxRail, and Sarah, you can go ahead and build it all the way out. VxRail is our hyperconverged infrastructure appliance based on VMware. The underlying storage technology is vSAN. vSphere obviously is the hypervisor, and then a lot of other sort of IP giblets that the legacy EMC puts together. Now we jointly engineer this with a VMware team. So in fact, there's a team of engineers of product management, of product marketing at VMware. There's a mirror image of that team on the legacy EMC side, but we function as one team, and that's under one set of leadership. So I lead the product management and product marketing functions both here and at VMware, and our general manager does the same. We launched this back in February of last year. And probably the biggest change that we've made this year above and beyond the software innovation that we built into the product is we've moved the underlying hardware over to Dell PowerEdge, right? No surprise. Right? Previously, this is based on another white box ODM. And that ODM actually remains in the portfolio and will for some period of time, until about the middle of next year. But predominantly our focus is on the PowerEdge based units. When we went to the 4.0 release, which came out in the fourth quarter of last year, we really turned up the dial in terms of configuration options. So over 250 times more configurability across the different platforms that we have. Memory, CPU, different storage options, different network connectivity options, different chassis and form factors. A lower cost point than we had, much more flash storage and much more CPU performance in a rack unit per rack unit basis. So, fairly large leap forward in terms of hardware, right? Previously, we had one platform. It was a 2U 4-node. Now we've gone to the Dell PowerEdge platform where we have multiple single node options from 1U to 2U platforms, storage dense platforms, et cetera. And I'll take a look at each of those. Go to the next.
Were there any benefits that you as a product manager or any customer specific examples that you saw where they were able to see more value by moving to that platform?
Yeah, massive. From a product management planning perspective, the way that this would normally work in working with a white box ODM is we would come up with what we thought we needed in terms of CPU, memory, whatever that package looked like. Submit that to an ODM through a centralized hardware engineering group, and they come back and say, here it is. Right? What that didn't let us do is sort of explore what's the art of the possible in terms of what we could do going forward. So now we're tightly wound up with the Dell team here in Austin to look at what we do at 14G, and we'll talk about that. And we're even into the 15th generation planning with them to say, how do we optimize 15G for what we do in the hyperconverged appliance space? Things around what we do with NVMe and 3D XPoint RAM, things we do with packaging and cluster expansion. All of those are things that we can build into those platforms far ahead of time, instead of sort of taking something a la carte off an ODM menu.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Is there any specific examples you can reference of where features within the VxRail team have, as those teams have become closer together, PowerEdge and the VxRail team, are there any specific examples of how features that were requested or
Yeah.
that came from the customer base ended up in the 14th, 15th gen, whatever?
Hard to get anything net new into the 14G, but one thing that was pretty meaningful for us is that we replaced the boot device on the 13G and the 14G systems to be an onboard SATA DOM, and that's critical for us.
Okay.
Specifically, we'll get into the weeds a little bit. When you're running vSAN, if you have memory size over 512 gig per platform, you can't boot that off an SD card. You can't boot. There are devices that you can't use to boot because you need to be able to core dump memory. And it would be unacceptable for us to ship a product if we couldn't get that memory core dump.
Okay.
So we moved to a higher speed SATA DOM so that we could expand the memory footprint per node and still be able to capture a memory dump if something went south. Right?
Would you mind asking a third follow-up related to that?
Please.
In other Dell PowerEdge customers that use other storage softwares, other storage platforms, whether it be, horizontally scaling big data analytics or whatever.
Yep.
Have you talked to other product managers of those software teams, and has their customers benefited from those changes that your team pushed into PowerEdge?
Probably too early to tell because that one was pretty specific for the way that we sold and went to market. I think that we'll start to see that a little bit in 14G, but more meaningfully in 15G. Believe it or not, we do work closely with the XC product team, right? That's the elephant in the room, right? Nutanix is part of our portfolio in the form of XC, and we do discuss things. We do collaborate with them on what we do. However, we do keep up some specific firewalls around roadmap because we don't want to violate our partnership agreements with Nutanix or any other vendor. So we've got to make sure we follow code of conduct, but we do look at what each other does and we do collaborate.
And so would I be accurate in echoing back what I heard you say is through the integration of VxRail team with the PowerEdge team that multiple features have been put into the current and future PowerEdge platforms which may be being leveraged, at least in the future, by other teams inside of the Dell EMC family?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the goal, right? It's not about. We were very, very quickly able to get past sort of the initial human nature reaction of this is my thing, and I'm going to specialize the heck out of it, and I'm not going to share it, and say, you know what? I want other businesses to succeed as well because it's got to be good for Dell Technologies overall. That kind of mindset's not going to last in an organization this big that wants to innovate this much. Not to say that's a natural human reaction, but we got over that pretty quickly, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I'll let you
No, of course.
continue.
What else did we do in 4.0? We have new cache and capacity drives. We've got new CPU DIMM options. We added GPUs, which was a huge request from a lot of our customers. So I would say that roughly 30 to 35% of the business is around the VDI use case right now, and we've got a lot of customers who want to leverage those NVIDIA GPUs. In some cases, AMD, more predominantly NVIDIA. More features around serviceability and availability, multiple disk groups, which we didn't have before, SSD wear monitoring, really important for us. We want to be able to predict when an SSD is going to near its end of life if it's premature. And one feature, which is not terribly sexy at all, but we had this before, but we've implemented on a single node basis, is one button shutdown. So from a VxRail Manager console, you can say, I want to shut the whole cluster down. It will gracefully go do that, right? Which, if you think what it takes, if you've had a 16-node, vSAN, vSphere cluster, to go power all that down at once and do it gracefully, takes a lot. We actually automate that, and believe it or not, customers really, really appreciate it. Okay. Go to the next, please. Just a quick word on lineup. So I talked about our 2U4 node, and this is what was based on that original ODM, and still is right now, by the way. Everything that you see from the entry level, VDI optimized, performance optimized, and storage dense, these are all based on Dell PowerEdge hardware under the covers. Okay? This is the real workhorse of the portfolio, the E series, right? So 1U, this gives you the most storage compute density on a rack unit per rack unit basis. By the way, this is also the building block for VxRack SDDC, our rack scale solution based on VMware Cloud Foundation. VDI optimized, this gives you the specific power and cooling requirements to be able to optionally add GPUs. P series, P for performance, similar CPU options here, but you get the opportunity to do more disk groups, right? So if you need multiple disk groups and need to drive more IOPS out of a single appliance, this is what you would go for. And the S series is storage dense. This is packed with 3.5-inch nearline SAS hard drives. Right, so the point there is if you need cheap and deep storage, this is what you would opt for. So if this is going to be a DR target or a backup target, if you're going to run data domain virtual edition, for instance, this is something that you would consider. Okay. Go ahead to the next. So let's talk about what's going really well as we bring this to market. So we announced this back in February. This is sort of what has risen from the ashes of our experience with VxRail, which I think most of you are familiar with. I know Sean is, and I think I saw an VxRail backpack somewhere around here. Fundamentally, we participated in that program as EMC, as Dell did, as a number of other OEMs did. It didn't really work. Didn't work for any of us. And it was really about the program and the packaging and the assumptions around how that went to market. Right? It was very rigid in terms of fixed configuration, not a lot of opportunity for partners to add value. Both the OEMs and VMware would be out talking about the roadmap at the same time, and they weren't terribly coordinated. There were just a lot of things that said this is not going to work. In the summertime of 2015, we sort of had that sit-down hard conversation that was between David Goulden and Pat Gelsinger, and said, what do we do about this, right? Do we look at different alternatives of attacking the HCI market, or do we do something else? And what they decided was this was too important for us not to participate in. So we've got to do this. We've got to do it in a different way. So at that point, that team at VMware that I talked about, the VxRail team, that effectively became that VMware team for us under the same product management leadership, the same general management leadership, and we re-architected to build VxRail. So since then, we relaunched this as VxRail in February 2016, and it went GA in March of the same year. We've overexceeded our booking goals. We've grown remarkably fast, probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest, growing product that the legacy EMC would have had. I don't know about Dell, so I won't speak for that business, but in terms of the unit volume we saw, it was absolutely off the charts. We saw in the first half of this year, we were predominantly selling into mid-market point workloads, right? I want to run VDI, I want to run database, I want to run Meditech, I want to run Epic, and it's going to be an island. So we sold a lot into those use cases. But our buyers really changed in the second half of the year, specifically around Q4. Please.
So, and pardon me for asking, so you had Epic installations on VxRail? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of our largest, in fact, at the time, it was our largest cluster to date. That was back in, I want to say, May, June. It was a 36-node cluster. It's running Epic and some VDI in a healthcare environment.
Was that accountable care organization, or was it or was that a classic hospital? How many beds?
It was a regional health organization.
Providing beds and like outpatient stuff like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That would imply, and I don't know for sure, you must have data encryption at rest on.
Actually, no. We have that coming in when we move to vSAN 6.6 this year, vSAN encryption. Normally what we do in those cases is we'll partner. So there are a couple of options you have if you want to do data at rest encryption. iTrust is a key partner for us, especially in the healthcare space. So we go to market with them. There's a native EMC solution called CloudLink that provides similar functionality. I think HITrust has more footprint in the market and more play. They tend to be very popular in federal and public sector as well. So they're a very, very close partner of ours.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking with the healthcare use case, that's a pretty big deal. So.
Yeah, exactly. But as I said, the buyers started to change in Q4, and we'll start to talk more about this and look at the numbers this year. But hyperconverged sort of moved from point workloads into core data center. Say, well, I'm actually going to build a large hyperconverged environment and use it for mixed workloads. So if we look at now the top 10 deals in Q4, they were all well over $1 million. The largest one was a 93 unit order. That's not remote sites. That's 93 units in a data center, multiple clusters though. So customer adoption is going really well, and I'll show you that relative to some of our competitors in the next slide. Roadmap execution has gone really well. It's been a ridiculously heavy lift for us. The mandate when we sort of rebooted this after VxRail was get this product market competitive in Q1 of the following year, which was there's no way, right? You need fairy dust for that. But we ended up executing against really 3 major releases through the course of 2016. Really 4 if you count the move on to PowerEdge hardware, right? Because that was a big one too. We had to adopt a new hardware platforms. So we've done very well at that, and the focus has really been on competitive features. Now, when you do that, when you focus on those features that make you competitive, you're naturally going to snowplow some of the annoying fixes and enhancements that you want to make into subsequent releases. So, we were in a mode of pushing things to the next release. We're catching up on that backlog, and this year we've actually moved to a much more frequent updating methodology. So, while we'll have major releases that will cut into Dell factories, we'll also have sort of minor maintenance releases and enhancements that will come out. And we put in place a fairly robust auto update feature into the product where when you go to the console, you'll be notified whether or not you want to download a new version.
So what I heard you say is you've increased your release schedule for the platform.
Yep.
Have you made is this a result of an agile transformation or a lean transformation as you move to iterative process?
A good question. So we operate engineering in an agile fashion. Now, the problem with that in the hardware business is while we can operate product management and engineering agile, the rest of the world around us is waterfall. Yep. Right? So when we look at when my team scopes a release with engineering, the first thing we do is develop what we call our consistency groups. Okay. We're borrowing from the replication. So we say, how are these features connected? Are there interdependencies amongst these features that create a consistency group? And those consistency groups sort of become the atomic unit of a feature. So let me give you an example. So let's say that one of the things that I wanted to enhance was password management. I have to worry about password management with vCenter, with ESXi hosts within VxRail Manager and potentially a connection to external Active Directory. If I didn't sort of create a consistency group around how I handle those, I can very easily make things worse for myself if I go enhance the heck out of how I treat ESXi password lifecycle management, but I haven't thought about it for vCenter, or I haven't thought about it for something else. And you can apply that to a lot of other interdependencies in the product. So we create these consistency groups, and then we look at those across code drops, knowing that when we work on that consistency group, it needs to be complete for that specific code drop. And we will typically do between 4 and 6 code drops in a major release. And typically the last 2 are stabilization.
Okay. And how, if you don't mind me asking a follow-up?
Yeah.
How often are you doing each release?
I'd like to do it monthly, but that's not realistic. What we will probably do is roughly quarterly.
Okay.
And we also have to differentiate when we cut something into Dell manufacturing versus just make it downloadable. Now these are all cumulative, obviously, but as we sort of adapt to the Dell supply chain, we need to be really cognizant of what we put into the factory and when, because we've got very specific windows on when we can make a change in the factory. Of course, with 14G coming this year, those windows are extra stringent. So the experience is the analogy, and it's not quite this way, but the analogy is sort of like if you get a laptop with Windows on it, you do the installation, then the very next thing you do is bring down all the updates that have happened since the image came out of the factory. Now, we don't intend to get that far away from what's in the factory, but that's what the experience will be like. So the first thing that you would do after installation is, okay, now take the updates that are required, or at least the ones that you choose to take that are available, and then go on from there.
May I ask a follow-up?
Of course you can.
So you mentioned consistency groups between internal and external products that are responsible for the integration, final delivery of those.
And even features within the product that depend on one another, yeah.
In your product is software. It's very interesting to me to see this convergence of the storage platform
Yeah.
that is made and delivered and improved using software development methodologies and the people that mix between it.
It is a really hard thing to do. But there's the difference. So you touch on another point, which we're going to talk about, which is why can't I just go get vSphere and vSAN, do some scripting, and basically end up at the same destination? Right? The answer is you could get to a similar destination that gives you vSphere and vSAN, software-defined storage, and all that. But the work of automation of lifecycle management in context with the hardware becomes critically important. Right? I could go to a vSAN ready node hardware compatibility list and say, great, I want that. I'm going to get that driver, or I'm going to get that drive controller, those drives, this version of BIOS, and on day one, I'm perfect. I know that it's going to work with vSAN and vSphere flawlessly. Okay, 2 months later, I go to buy that same server. Oh, wait a minute, the BIOS is revved, drive controller is revved, maybe that drive isn't available, but there's a substitute. Do I go back and, all right, how are these going to work together in a system?
Yeah.
In that kind of a case, as a customer, that's up to you, right? It means you have a spreadsheet somewhere that makes sure that as you build that cluster out, that you keep everything in sync. We take that off your hands, and we do that in the factory in our development process, right? So we look at all those things. Now, one of the interesting and big benefits that we get out of being Dell is iDRAC, right? iDRAC, fantastic capabilities in terms of in-band and out-of-band management of hardware, being able to do firmware updates and other things. Firmware updates are those are things that have been on our roadmap with the previous generation of hardware, and we're about to deliver them, and then Dell happens. At that point, it's, well, hang on, we really need to be focused on hardware lifecycle management in the context of Dell with iDRAC versus building our own on white box.
What I'm kind of hearing you say is you built these consistency groups between internal and external products, software and hardware, that created dependency tracking within them.
Yep.
My assumption is there's some sort of continuous integration pipeline that your teams are using.
Yep.
And that I'm kind of listening between the lines, and I almost saw a smile on your face when you mentioned the iDRAC side.
Yeah.
So in the test-driven development portion of your CI pipeline, when you integrated iDRAC into it, how did that impact your iteration time and the time that it took the test to complete to get the feedback to your developers so you could innovate more?
Let me give you a real-world example of that. So in previous generation hardware, the 2U4 node, if I needed to basically return that to a factory state, I didn't have a single point where I could sort of plug in and have all those things happen automatically. So, for instance, tearing down a POC was just as hard as setting one up. I needed to have everything connected, right? Because the nodes don't connect on the backplane, they connect through the network. So I needed everything to be connected in the network. The network needed to be perfect. And I needed to bring my laptop out with our mobile build server that would go re-image everything and bring it back to sort of ground zero. With iDRAC, right, none of that, right? I get KVM access. I can show up with a thumb drive and say, all right, I've got new version of software. I want to take this back to factory. And the utility we use in iDRAC is called Razor, R-A-S-R, and I always forget what it stands for.
Yeah.
And so I can use that and say, great, I'm going to copy this image from this thumb drive onto the SD card. From there, it ends up on our SATA DOM for first run. So I can be a lot more agile in terms of bare metal recovery and factory reset thanks to some of those iDRAC tools. So for example, I've got two products, Rail, which we're talking about today, where all of my hardware management and abstraction is sort of in band. Don't depend on anything external or connected to an iDRAC port to do it. I do it all in band. I have VxRack, which is big rack scale. I've got lots and lots of compute, lots of network connectivity, and I very purposely do out-of-band management so I can have something that sits outside of everything, and I can do all those kinds of bare metal recovery things with those tools. Those things are largely incompatible, right? It doesn't make sense with Rail because that's extra cost to have something that's extra and out-of-band, but in-band in a large scale-out rack environment is not what I want, because I want the majority of my compute nodes in a rack scale environment to be dumb, right? I want to be able to re-image them from bare metal. I want to be able to change the version of VMware on them. I want to wipe them out at a moment's notice, subdivide them, do all sorts of crazy things to them. So I don't want them to be smart. I want a smart layer of management, pets, livestock, right? So I don't know that there is one sort of management paradigm or set of tools that does all that, but it's a noble goal to get there. And yes, first joint Dell EMC product to be fully built and drop shipped from a Dell factory to an end user, and all the fun that comes with that. Next, please. In terms of results, how do we measure how we're doing? This is subjective, but it's based on IDC data. So we said, well, let's compare ourselves to others that are in this market and sort of normalize it to time. Say, within our first 4 quarters of operation versus their first 4 quarters of operation, how do we do? We actually do pretty well against what are considered market leaders today, and Nutanix being that leader. So that makes us feel good, but obviously we've got much bigger ambitions. Okay. Next slide. What did we not do well in the first year? Our professional services backlog. So a company this size, and I'll speak for EMC, but I'm sure it's true of others, especially after the experience that we had last year with VxRail and vSpecs Blue, we didn't invest up front enough in professional services to go do all these deployments. So, and that's pretty typical, right? So, a lot of the supporting organizations may hold back full investment in terms of people and time until they start to see success. But when it goes like that, you tend to be a little bit flat-footed. So we certainly ran into some of that where, it was taking a long, you get the box right away, but then it would take, weeks to get somebody to come out and go through the installation with you. We have struggled, and we still struggle with, helping people to understand what the difference is between, say, a vSAN ready node and a build your own model versus appliance, what we were just talking about. When you lay those two things out in front of a customer, what the customer is very likely to say is, well, I want all the automation and lifecycle management and stuff that I get in that one, and I want to pay that price for it. So, go figure it out. So we've got to be a little bit better about how we describe that. And serviceability, right? So one of our major release this year, most of the features there are around serviceability. Now, as I said, our customers changed late Q3 into Q4, and they went to core data center applications versus point workloads. Whole different realm in terms of serviceability. And it's inside baseball stuff that we deal with, like we have the remote support capability, dial home. The appliance dials home on its own. Most legacy EMC customers who are big EMC customers have a specific remote support gateway that all EMC products just plug into. We didn't have that ability, and they went, "What the heck? Why are you not using this gateway?" So we got to go back and add that. We have the option of having an internally deployed vCenter that we automate, or you can now plug into an external one. Right? That was new for us because customers looked at this and said, well, for a pop-up environment for a point workload, that's perfectly fine. I want the vCenter to be fully self-contained in the cluster. Go to the data center, large shared environment. Hell no, I'm not going to add another vCenter to my environment. I got too many vCenters as it is already. You need to plug into the external one. And by the way, this one, there are 7 major ways to do high availability on vCenter. And then if you take into account database clustering, there are probably 14 or 15 all said. So being able to plug into those differentiating kinds of environments is big for us. And so we get those features in there, and then we figure out how we service those going forward. So we put a pretty big burden on our CS and PS organizations, through this process. But look, these are good problems to have from a product perspective.
So you mentioned your PS and CS organizations. How did this affect your channel? So the channel partners are bringing this to market.
Yeah.
One, did you feel they were meeting the need, dropping the ball? Were there some that were highlight channel partners that are really serving their customers well and serving you well?
There are several channel partners who have been outstanding in this. I will say that some of the biggest deals that we saw in Q3 and Q4 had none of our salespeople involved, that were driven by the channel. The people who are really driving this for us tend to be the tier ones, the titanium black level partners who have bought into this because they're dealing with the larger customers who know that they are going to go to hyperconverged, and so they're going to turn to those kinds of partners for that guidance. Not as much of our what we would call our growth partners are the ones that go through distribution, but it's really been the larger value add partners. We sell roughly, by the way, just by our old segmentation, it's about 50-50 between enterprise customers and mid-market customers.
Okay.
Go ahead. So what do we do? So we've added many more PS people to this. We're doing boot camps around the world to get them all ready to solo and deploy this. We're working on positioning, and you'll start to see that in our new marketing material, and very specific focus on product serviceability in the next major release. Okay, so what are we doing going forward? First of all, any questions on what we're doing now? Because this is going to get a little, off in the clouds a bit. But questions on what we're doing with the product today, how it's going, how it's not going. Yep. Okay. So let's go to the next and talk about what's coming in 2018. In Q4 of 2016, and I'm always talking in calendar, I haven't yet made the mental leap to Dell fiscal years yet. We sort of hit an inflection point in terms of all flash, right? So the majority of VxRail unit sales were all flash in fourth quarter 2016. So for the year, it was sort of trending in the 40-something% for most of the year, and then in Q4, boom, way over 50% now. So, that tells us a few things. It tells us certainly the price of flash is going down, while availability is challenging. But it also tells us that our efforts around engineering and innovation with vSAN and with the hardware really needs to be centered around optimizing around flash. Spinning drives are the exception for us at this point, and I think they will be for most people. So, if you look at the cost curves of SSDs versus HDDs, no surprise, they all follow a similar ramp as most drives do. I mean, we've been doing it at EMC for 30 years. The curves almost always look like this. But now the price and the effective price per gigabyte on flash is much more attractive. And we've got a lot of natural advantages with vSAN that help us play into that. Write minimization being a big one. So vSAN having a cache tier and a capacity tier is hugely important for us, because that means that I can have a high endurance flash device as my cache tier, and I can have a lot of low endurance cache in that capacity tier. 1 write per day, half write per day flash. And the bigger the drive is, the more endurance I actually get out of it. So that means that we can build fairly high capacity flash systems with relatively inexpensive SSDs in that capacity tier. That message resonates like you wouldn't believe with customers, right? So.
Have you experienced, or right now, in the past, or when are you expecting the future for, with your platform, that cross point, that breaking point, where spinning disk and flash, where flash becomes more cost effective for price performance platform?
On a well, look, capacity-wise, it already is.
Okay.
And it's roughly equivalent before you factor in data reduction, right? They're close. Now, here's the reason, right? And maybe it's an unnatural reason. So vSAN today, most of our devices are 2.5-inch drives, aside from the S series, which is nearline SAS 3.5-inch. If you want to go beyond about 2 terabytes of hard drive capacity, you need to be native 4K formatted instead of 512 native. Those drivers don't exist in VMware today to use native 4K drives. Now, you could use 512E drives. That support is there today. We've resisted the urge to do that because the performance, because of the formatting offset, can be very inconsistent from drive to drive, even driver version to driver version. Okay?
Are there any benefits as joining the Dell EMC family? Having, I would assume, pretty tight access to the PowerEdge team, and the, I guess, disks are manufactured by a supplier and come to you, but I assume you have a tight relationship with them.
Yeah.
Are there any benefits that you've seen in the VxRail platform from the increasing level of partnership and alignment on the disk side?
Yeah, that's been huge. So right now I can go to some of our team is here in Austin, and they sit with the drive engineering team, so I can go see what the 3-year roadmap is for SSDs from HGSD, Samsung, Toshiba, et cetera, 3 years out, and whether they're in the PowerEdge plan, whether they could be in the PowerEdge plan, and what those specs are. Now, previously, because, we're plugging into a bigger train that is much more aligned with where we want to go from an appliance perspective than actually EMC drive engineering was either. Right? So EMC had a large global drive engineering organization. Now, their job was to maintain a drive portfolio and availability across the whole company. Yeah. My needs as an appliance business differ vastly from what Symmetrix VMAX or VNX or Unity or Data Domain or you name all the storage platforms that we have. So I didn't necessarily have the degrees of flexibility to say, today with PowerEdge team, I can say, all right, I need dual vendor strategy for each of these kinds of drives for the next 3 years, and we can put that on a spreadsheet and everybody can swear to it, and off we go, right? We take that uncertainty out. Previously, that wasn't the case because, look, we really want to drive volume with these 2 vendors because VMAX is doing it and they consume way more drives than you do. So you should really use one of these drives versus us put another drive in the portfolio. We would have those conversations all the time. So now that we work directly with PowerEdge, we're super copacetic with them because where they're going is where we're going.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Other things that have made it more economic: data efficiency, dedupe, and compression. Although, look, you got to wonder if you look a few years out, you think, how much sense do these data efficiency services really make? Right? There are 16 terabyte flash drives that you can get now. At some point, you're trading off CPU resources to make your disks bigger. But the disks are already 16 terabytes and growing from there. Is it really cost effective to start trading off CPU clock cycles in order to get more capacity? It remains to be seen. We're not there yet, but that's possible. Both increased and decreased endurance, very important. Things like 1 write per day, half write per day drives, absolutely critical in our capacity tier to drive that cost down. Okay. Go ahead to the next. So 3 areas that we're focused on in 2018 in the next gen of the VxRail appliances. And these are really all enabled by the Skylake Purley generation of Intel. So Skylake being the chip, Purley being the server platform. So those are NVMe in drives as well as in DIMMs. and then different network connectivity, so specifically RDMA over Ethernet, right? These are going to be key performance enablers and ultimately cost advantages, although that will take a little time.
Forgive me for not knowing this already, but so your NVMe over Ethernet, in my understanding, will allow you to expand your PCI Express bus between multiple nodes and directly address memory on a node.
Yep.
How will that affect, in the use case you talked about of needing a certain size disk to be able to dump consistency data to, how will implementation of RDMA over Ethernet affect that type of scenario where effectively you don't have access to the memory of a peer node?
Good question. Hang on to that for a second. Let me talk about how these play out from a performance perspective, and then come back to that because that's a good point. Could you go to the next, Sarah? I think I have. Okay, so I completely stole this analogy and put graphics on. I stole it from Chris Malore at the Register. He wrote a really good article on this, and I love Chris. And he did something really clever. It's super hard for us, for human beings, to think in terms of computer time. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about the differing latency and performance in a system, it's hard to make that real. So he said, okay, so normalize on one thing. So if a CPU reading from its L1 cache takes 1 second, and 1 second is our atomic unit, then reading from DRAM takes 6 minutes. So build it out one. That means reading from a hard drive takes 6 years. Mm-hmm. You build it out again. That means reading from what are probably the faster NVMe SSDs today, that takes about 2 days. Mm-hmm. And build out one more. Reading from 3D cross-point based DIMMs, Optane DIMMs, mm-hmm. takes about 4 hours, but it's persistent. It's key. So if you think about what we just talked about in terms of how we're tiering the data, mm-hmm. whether it's in cache or whether it's on a capacity tier, all of a sudden I can sort of shift that whole curve up. So instead of having cache in SSD and capacity in lower endurance SSDs, I can start to have cache in 3D crosspoint, and I could start to have capacity down here in NVMe SSDs. And sort of that technology exists in 13G today, right? You can go get NVMe drives right now, and drive vendors would love us, of course, to start using them. Mm-hmm. What you miss is the driver support to treat it not like a drive. That's mm-hmm. the key thing, because in all of these cases, every system you have, as soon as you start to optimize something, you simply are going to move the bottleneck to the next thing that needs to be optimized, and you're going to crank through that iteration after iteration. And you've got to look at these things as a system, and then you have to look at them as a cluster in your environment. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that needs to happen for us to take full advantage of that is, first of all, driver support from VMware. Okay. Not only for the SSDs, which is fairly easy, but also for the memory. Now, the key is in those drivers, you stop treating, in fact, you go to the next slide, you stop treating the SSD as a disk, and you treat it like what it really is, which is memory, right? So a memory interface into that, and a memory interface into the crosspoint RAM. So look, this is what we were selling in vSAN initially. We had serial attached SCSI, tops out at 12 gig, serial ATA, tops out at 6 gig traditional DRAM. Today, what we're predominantly selling is MLC SSDs and traditional RAM, and this is now the majority of the business. Tomorrow, and not literally tomorrow or the day after, but think a little further out, it will be 3D crosspoint as cache tier, 3D NVMe drives. That's where we expect it to go.
And would I be incorrect in making coming to the conclusion that when 3D crosspoint has full driver support in the virtualization platform that you choose, and you're able to expand, have remote direct memory access of adjacent nodes over a 10 or 40 gig fabric,
yep.
that your VxRail look pretty close to what a Symmetrix was capability and speed-wise of the horizontally scaling. What would you see the horizontal scalability limits be in with this architecture?
I think that the scalability limits of the physical hardware and protocols is one thing. The other more meaningful one is the size of the HA domain that you would build within vSphere.
Okay.
That's the more practical limitation. But you're right. You did oversimplify a little bit because
Vastly oversimplified.
yes, because it's one thing. It's one thing to have the driver support, but then it's another thing to start to now leverage those drivers more effectively. So, today, if vSAN looks at a cache device and it's thinking in terms of disk blocks, I can have non-volatile byte addressable memory. I've got a lot of flexibility in terms of what I can do here. Same with the SSDs. So there are going to be layers of protocol innovation that have to take place to make this real. In the 14Gs, we'll have the option of 25 gig connectivity at first. Right, so that'll be the first step.
Follow-up question, if I may?
Yeah.
The driver. So you talked about integration with the PowerEdge teams, how the VxRail team is passing information, Nutanix is passing information, how you've built, as you put it, a consistency group between internal and external teams, and that's resulted in decreased iteration times. So you're getting more stuff out to the customers.
Yeah.
The driver team that is currently involved in these, what level of integration does between you and the drivers team, PowerEdge team, how's that work?
That's tougher, but it moves in the right direction, let's say. So the influencer for changes in VMware drivers. First of all, let's set the stage. So vSAN doesn't release independently, right? So we hear about versions of vSphere, but it's not like you go download vSphere. Now it's baked into vSphere. It's in the kernel. That's an advantage because it makes it ridiculously fast and more efficient. But what that means is there is a necessary dependency, right? They are subservient to the release vehicles and the supporting infrastructure of vSphere to go out. And these numbers aren't right, but there's probably 3,000 plus vSphere engineers and 50 vSAN engineers. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's that kind of order of magnitude.
Yeah.
So vSAN is sort of largely being pulled on. Now vSAN will exert pressure, desire, and needs for vSphere to adapt those drivers and sometimes participate in that. But those are largely in the vSphere team themselves.
Okay.
Now, that's a good relationship as it stands. We don't see any negative to it. It's worked so far. It seems to continue to work. Now, remember, there's also another driver team that we need to worry about that we haven't talked about, and that's here on the Dell side.
Okay.
Right. So, Dell in the PowerEdge team, they've got a group responsible for operating systems. So, if you think about where does your custom ESXi ISO for vSphere come from? It comes from this group. Right? They insert the specific drivers for the specific hardware. So there's a level of coordination with them as well. It takes a village. I mean, it really does.
And I'm not going to. I don't want to stop your presentation, but you don't know.
Oh, we're almost done. This is all about questions, guys. So please.
And
how are we doing on time, by the way?
About 10.
10? Good.
And this kind of skirts around your thing, so I think it's appropriate, but you do not have to answer it.
Yeah.
Dell going private.
Yeah.
With all the teams that you have to integrate with all the internal and external kind of moving gears that are coming together to bring this product to market, to your customers, and all the different iterations and new features. Yeah. Do you feel that, or do you have information, or however you want to answer it, how has Dell going private affected your ability as a product manager to deliver innovation in this platform?
So I'm legacy or heritage, whatever the right word, heritage EMC. So I wasn't there for the Dell go private. Obviously, I was there for EMC becoming part of Dell and going private. How has it changed? I can't say that it has in any meaningful way. We still care about earnings. It's 3 months, but it's just 3 months offset from when we used to. Every quarter is still the most important quarter of our lives. We still operate that way. But what it has done is, given us the sort of wake-up call to go figure out how we work with new groups, that companies that are of roughly the same age, and sometimes the same culture, sometimes different culture, and figuring out how to work that. Look, I'll be honest. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, right? But most of the time I'm pretty happy when I go home. We've got 140, 160,000 exceptionally well-intentioned people who are very good at their jobs and largely want to help. And it's a matter of figuring out who can help and when, and what kind of leverage you get out of it. I mean, I'll give. This is exceptionally trite. We talked about integrating with iDRAC. We've done some with it. We've not yet really scratched the surface of what we can do with it. I think that same analogy is true with the people in the organizations between Dell and EMC. We managed to get this product onto PowerEdge and get it into the market and be very successful with it in a short time. And there's no shortage of hard work, pain, and effort, and meeting upon meeting upon meeting to get that done. But I feel like we haven't yet figured out how we can fully leverage each other and how this will work. So, that's encouraging to me. Right? Honestly, it's encouraging.
Awesome.
Maybe I have one more slide, and it's going to be a letdown after that. Because I was just going to talk about Ethernet, but screw that. Right? So, we're going to have Ethernet. It's going to have RDMA. It's going to be super awesome. So, but look at other questions. Yeah, please.
I had a question that's come in. Is a fiber channel adapter support? I know the point of VxRail is to be an island, but in reality, enterprise has got legacy storage to attach to. Is that something that's now supported with it going to 1U?
It's not, and it's actually not planned either. We are specifically focused on IP-based storage, and will continue to be. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. I got a photograph about 2 months ago from someone in Australia who said, where can I get the fiber channel HBA for the unit? I said, we don't have one. We don't do it. He goes, yeah, you do. No, I swear to you, I worked with this product for 3 years. We don't have one. He sends me a picture where a customer had found an HBA that they could get into our chassis, and they had to cut a little bit of sheet metal to do it. But look, you have full access to vSphere. You could potentially make it work. Don't call support. Right, but no, it's not in our plans.
Can you do memory upgrades on the individual servers themselves?
On the Dells, you can. Yes.
But with no support for non-IP storage, what's the recommended migration strategy for a customer with an existing fiber channel array that they need to move thousands of VMs off?
Yeah. We offer that as a service.
That's TSO. Let's put together.
That is typically what we do, and if we would typically bridge that gap through a PS engagement if they wanted to move off fiber channel. Typically, if it's one of our arrays, you can get some level of IP connectivity to do that.
Yeah, telling me it's a PS engagement is not an acceptable answer.
Yeah.
Because a PS engagement is simply I get in somebody else's experts.
Yeah.
I have my own experts.
Yeah.
This is architecturally a very simple product, doesn't require a PS engagement to deploy.
Yeah.
Why is my migration a PS engagement?
Well, if you've got a large shared environment of on a traditional fiber channel array, things are going to get simpler, but that complexity is sort of the last generation. I mean, we can get you there, but automating something like that is a big deal.
Just seems that if you're asking people to change architectures, it's
well,
a sensible move to simplify that change. I know it's very uncommon in HCI
True.
to simplify the change.
Yeah.
Can't you just do a shared nothing migration within vCenter? And then
Absolutely, you can. How does that go wrong? What does it look like when that goes wrong?
How are the ways that it can go wrong?
Right.
Yeah.
No, you're right. Well, I'll say something that is also a little controversial. Being an owner of this product, it's not right for everybody. But there are certain use cases where we're perfectly happy, and customers are perfectly happy and well served with a server with a traditional array. Look, if you think about our business, right? So this is fastest growing business within our four walls, and if I look at it next to what we do in primary storage, we're dwarfed by that now. Future of primary storage, is it doing? No, it's not doing this anymore. So there'll be a shift there, but do I want those businesses to continue to succeed? Absolutely. Right? I'm not keeping the lights on with this yet. I aspire to, but and at the same time, it's not right for every customer, every use case.
Part of the way that you ease that is to ease that transition. I mean, I think what we probably see customers doing will be deploying something like staying within the Dell stable on R720 or 820, whatever the current edition model is, that is a member of your vSAN cluster that you provide here, and also has a fiber channel adapter and is a fully supported solution, and using a swing host.
Yeah.
But having some guidance about the right way to go about that,
Okay.
rather than go by a PS consulting or a Dell consulting engagement. I don't know, do you have a consulting arm that operates in New Zealand?
Absolutely.
That's the element is that a lot of these things aren't universally distributed as well.
Fair enough.
So quick question, you'd mentioned 25 gig, 25, 50, 100 gig coming someday down the road. Did you give a specific time on that, or do you have a range?
We'll be on the 14G hardware in the second half of this calendar year. I would expect that the 25 gig. So all the Dell servers, right? They have what's called the network daughter card. That's the base network connectivity, and you can add additional PCI cards. So we'll have the option of selecting I believe it's a dual port 25 gig network daughter card in our base models.
The networking platforms that this.
Sorry, the what platforms?
The network platforms. Are you integrating and testing with Dell's open networking based switching in this?
Not in the context of Rail, but we are in VxRail.
Okay.
And in that case, we're actually using them as the management network switches. And we're actually running a little bit of workload on there for management around the network. That's one of those things that we haven't yet fully leveraged. How do we bring the Dell networking portfolio together with Rail? As a customer, you're always better off, buying the switch with Rail, because you think about it, and it's similar with any of the other hyperconverged platforms. When you're going to deploy this, you're going to connect it to the other nodes in the cluster through your own network. No, your own network is always messy, right? I mean, at least this is our observation. So some of the early deployments that we did in the earlier code, everything works absolutely flawlessly if the network's perfect. If I can get to the time server, I can get to DNS. If the subnet masks don't overlap, if. In the real world, that's rarely the case. And what we also found is the people that we're selling to, that were buying this, were the virtual infrastructure owners, not the network owners. So you roll in on site with the box and say, hey, you need these VLANs, you need this multicast, you need this, you need this, you need this. They say, okay, we'll get the network guy. Let's talk in 6 weeks, sort of thing. Yeah.
And this may be talking about futures, so if you can't answer it, don't.
Yeah.
As you integrate Dell, the open networking platforms into the back of VxRail, I think this would happen eventually.
Yeah.
One, this is a statement. It sounds to me like you're saying, if you can confirm this, whether I'm crazy or not, that you're looking at these 10 and 40 gig or these 10 plus gig switching platforms on the back end, almost as a fabric, especially as RDMA goes across it.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And then the second point, with kind of the ease of deployment of VxRail, will you be providing a methodology where the configuration of those open networking switches will be automatically provisioned in accordance with best practices for your cluster.
We absolutely want that. I can't tell you that there's a committed plan to do that. Now, we did, prior to Dell, EMC did have a close relationship with another networking vendor, not Cisco, so don't read anything into it, where we would actually, we have a configuration tool, so you can build a VxRail configuration to a JSON file ahead of time if you don't want to put all the data in interactively. We actually extended that, so when you put that information in, it would also spit out a configuration file you could load directly into a Brocade IP switch, for example. That was not hard to do. I think we should get a little bit more sophisticated with that in terms of what we do with Dell.